Have you ever been judged for how you seemed, rather than who you really are? Ever felt invisible, even though you knew you had so much to offer? Picture starting your first day in a place that should be full of hope, only to find cold stares and harsh words. This is Angela's story, a brave nurse who stepped into the hospital believing she could make a difference. But what she didn't expect was a doctor, blinded by prejudice, underestimating her based on what he thought he saw. What happens next will turn everything on its head. Stick around to witness the twist no one ever saw coming. Angela paused for a moment in front of the Grand St. Mary's Hospital. Her eyes swept over the building's facade, and she felt her heart race. A mix of anxiety and hope filled her chest as she straightened the badge on her neatly pressed uniform. This is the start of a new chapter, she murmured to herself, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. As she walked through the automatic doors, the scent of antiseptic mingled with the constant buzz of hurried footsteps and muffled voices. The harsh white light reflected off the sterile corridors, and Angela instantly felt eyes on her. She could sense people sizing her up, as if everyone she passed was quietly judging her. Will I fit in here? Angela wondered, feeling the weight of expectations and insecurities pressing down on her shoulders. The atmosphere wasn't welcoming, it was more like a test, as if she had to prove her worth to every one of those unfamiliar faces. She took a deep breath and repeated to herself the words her mother always told her: "You are more than the looks you get. Show who you are through what you do, not by what they say." Still, it was hard to shake the unease that made her feel like an outsider. As Angela walked the halls, she noticed small groups of nurses whispering amongst themselves, just loud enough for their snickers and sidelong glances to be noticed. Their eyes met hers briefly, only to flicker away with a half-smile that seemed to carry more judgment than friendliness. They don't even know me, she thought, trying to keep her head held high. But deep down, she felt the all-too-familiar sting of being underestimated, of being put in a box simply for being there. The silence in those exchanged glances and muffled gossip brought back memories of other times when, despite her skills and experience, she always had to fight to be seen and heard. On her way to the nurses' station, Angela realized that at St. Mary's, it wasn't enough to be good at her job, she would have to be flawless. And even then, she knew it still wouldn't be enough for many people there. Finally, Angela was called to meet the head of the medical team, Dr. Henry. As she stepped into the room, she saw a tall man with a stern posture and a sharp gaze, poring over some papers without even looking up to acknowledge her. His presence was imposing, like a marble statue, cold and unyielding. "I'm Angela, the new nurse," she said, trying to sound confident even though the nerves threatened to shake her voice. Dr. Henry slowly raised his eyes, seeming to take in every detail of Angela's figure. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. When he finally spoke, his tone was harsh and distant. "Look, nurse, I hope you know how to follow orders without question. I don't have time for amateurs." His words hit like a punch to the gut. Angela felt the heat rise to her cheeks, a mix of anger and humiliation. "How can he judge me without even knowing me?" she thought, swallowing hard. But with a calm that felt almost unnatural, she replied, "With all due respect, Doctor, I'm here to do my very best." Dr. Henry didn't bother to reply. He simply returned to his papers, indifferent, as though she were just an insignificant detail in his busy routine. Angela left the room feeling a spark of determination ignite inside her. "I'll prove him wrong," she promised herself. Days at St. Mary's Hospital were a constant battle for Angela. Every shift seemed to drag on forever as she struggled to be seen, to be heard. Every time she tried to suggest improvements to procedures or streamline patient care, her ideas were dismissed as if they were of no value at all. During a routine meeting, Angela suggested a change in the triage process to make patient care quicker and more efficient. Before she could even finish her explanation, Dr. Henry interrupted her with a cynical smile. "That's not a nurse's job," he said, looking directly at her with a patronizing air. "Just focus on following the orders I give you, not on making suggestions." Angela felt a wave of humiliation mixed with anger. How many more times am I going to be treated like I'm incapable, she thought. His words echoed in her mind like a painful reminder that she would always have to prove herself twice over just to be taken seriously. But she knew giving up wasn't an option. "You won't break me," she thought, clenching her fists under the table. Even so, discouragement began to creep in. At the end of each shift, Angela found herself questioning her purpose, a decision to choose this hospital. Is it really worth fighting in a place where no one wants to listen to me? "I'm in this alone," she whispered to herself when she was alone, washing her hands as the cold water ran over her fingers. During a brief break, in a moment of venting with a fellow doctor, Dr. Henry revealed a side of himself that few people knew. He had grown up under the constant pressure of being the best. His father, a renowned and demanding doctor, never accepted anything less than perfection. Now, with his father facing a serious illness, Dr. Henry felt as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "I can't afford to fail, you understand," he said, his voice lower, almost trembling. "My father taught me that weakness is not an option. If I trust the wrong person, I could put everything at risk. There's no room for mistakes, especially not now." That small glimpse into Dr. Henry's past didn't completely excuse his behavior, but it did explain the walls he'd built around himself. He was trapped in an armor of arrogance and fear, a defense against the idea of failure, a defense that Angela, without realizing it, was about to break through. The weeks dragged on, and Angela felt as if she were fighting against a relentless tide. Every gesture, every attempt to stand out was stifled by prejudice and indifference. One evening, after a grueling shift, she sat alone in her small apartment, her hands trembling from exhaustion. She looked out of the window, the city lights seeming as distant as her dreams of being recognized for who she truly was, a capable and dedicated professional. "I never thought it would be this hard," she murmured, feeling the tears roll down her face. Maybe I should just give up. Maybe I'll never be able to show what I can really do." Angela remembered the promise she'd made to herself, but in that moment, it felt like an empty vow. She felt crushed by the disdain, undervalued and utterly alone. Am I just fooling myself? Is all my effort in vain? But then, like an echo from the past, she heard her mother's soft, encouraging voice in her mind, "You're stronger than they think. No matter how many times they try to put you down, your strength lies in your courage to keep going." She took a deep breath, dried her tears, and stood up. "I won't give up. Not for them, but for me. And for the patients who depend on my work." In that moment, Angela decided that no matter how much she was ignored or dismissed, she would keep fighting, because she knew that the only person who could truly define her worth was herself. The emergency alarm blared loudly through the corridors of St. Mary's Hospital. All eyes turned to the door as paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, a patient in critical condition lying on it. The emergency room erupted into a controlled frenzy as every professional snapped into action. Angela, seeing the severity of the situation, felt her heart racing, but her focus remained unshakable. Dr. Henry quickly took command, barking out orders in a firm, almost frantic voice. But unlike his usual confident demeanor, there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes, a flicker of panic he was struggling to suppress. Angela moved closer to the monitor displaying the patient's vitals, and a wave of concern washed over her. She spotted something the rest of the team seemed to be overlooking, a clear sign of an impending cardiac crisis. "Dr. Henry," Angela called out, raising her voice to be heard over the chaos. "The signs indicate acute heart failure. We need to change the treatment plan now." But he ignored her, as he always did, his face tense and his hands moving frantically as he tried to manage the situation. "I'm in charge here, nurse," he shouted, his voice filled with frustration and wounded pride. "I don't need input from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about." In that moment, something inside Angela snapped. She saw the hollow, desperate look in the patient's eyes, a life that could be lost because of one man's stubborn refusal to listen. Everyone around them seemed frozen in their tasks, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. "I can't let this happen." Not this time, Angela thought, and a fierce determination sparked in her eyes. She took a deep breath and, summoning every ounce of courage, stepped forward into the center of the room. "Excuse me, doctor," she said, her voice brooking no argument, as she positioned herself beside the patient. "I know what needs to be done, and I'm doing it now." With quick, precise movements, she adjusted the treatment plan, administering the correct medication and directing the team with the authority of a natural leader. The machines began to respond, and the chaotic beeping of the heart monitor slowly settled into a steady rhythm. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as they watched Angela bring a life back from the brink. For a moment, it was as if she were the only person in the world, laser-focused on a mission that could not fail. As the crisis subsided and the tension in the room finally lifted, a nurse burst in, clutching a report in her hands. "Dr. Henry, the patient, is your father," she said, her voice trembling and eyes wide with shock. The impact of her words hit the room like a silent thunderclap. Dr. Henry, always so composed and unyielding, now stood pale and motionless, his gaze fixed on the unconscious face of his father. He blinked several times, as if struggling to grasp what had just happened. The very woman he had belittled and humiliated, the nurse he had dismissed so many times, had just saved his father's life. Angela, on the other hand, remained calm. She showed no hint of triumph, no look of vindication. She knew she'd acted for the right reason, not to prove anything to anyone, but because it was her duty, because this is what she did, she cared for lives. Dr. Henry took a hesitant step towards Angela, his voice trembling, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and admiration. I was wrong about you," he began, almost whispering, the words catching in his throat. "I don't know how to thank you for this. You saved my father's life, and showed me that I was blinded by my own pride." Angela looked at him, her face calm, but her eyes held an indescribable strength. "Doctor, I didn't do this for you. I did it for my patient, because he deserved the best care I could provide," she replied, with a gentle firmness, but also filled with compassion. After that day, a transformative change swept through St. Mary's Hospital. Dr. Henry was no longer the same arrogant and distant man Angela had met on her first day. His rigid posture gave way to a more humble and empathetic leader, someone who finally learned to value all the members of his team, regardless of their rank or title. In a meeting with the entire hospital staff, Dr. Henry did something no one expected. He stood up and, in front of everyone, addressed Angela. "Today, I would like to apologize," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I was wrong, not just as a doctor, but as a human being. Angela is not just an excellent nurse, she's the reason my father is alive today. And that's something I can never repay." Angela felt a wave of emotions wash over her. It wasn't the validation she had been seeking, but rather the truth she had always known. Her strength and dedication were greater than any outside judgment. The days following the emergency incident were marked by a quiet transformation at St. Mary's Hospital. The dynamic that had once been filled with judgmental stares and whispered gossip turned into an atmosphere of respect and admiration. Angela was no longer the invisible nurse, dismissed for her ideas and opinions. She was now recognized as the dedicated and courageous professional she always had been. Dr. Henry, once the symbol of arrogance and coldness, had changed noticeably. He started to engage more with the team, listening to their opinions, valuing every suggestion, including Angela's. He was no longer the man who led through fear and distance, but someone who was learning to lead with humility and empathy. During a new team meeting, Dr. Henry took the floor and, with a different light in his eyes, said, "I had to watch my own world crumble to realize that true strength isn't about control or power. It's about recognizing the people around you, trusting them, and being humble enough to learn from them." Angela taught me that. The room filled with a silent emotion. Some of Angela's former critics exchanged embarrassed glances, while others nodded in respect. Angela, for her part, remained calm, knowing that her worth was never in the words of others but in her actions and the integrity of her work. Angela became a symbol of resilience not just for St. Mary's Hospital, but for everyone who knew her story. She proved that prejudice can be overcome not with anger or revenge, but with patience, dedication, and strength of character. As she looked out the hospital window, watching the world go by, Angela reflected on her journey. How often do people fail to see someone's potential because they are blinded by their own insecurities and biases, she wondered. What touched her most was Dr. Henry's transformation, which represented not just a personal victory but a triumph for anyone who has ever been underestimated, ignored, or unfairly judged. "I am more than they think of me," Angela said to herself, but this time, her words were not of defiance or resistance. They were of acceptance and pride. She knew she had become so much more than any initial judgment could have suggested. At the end of that shift, as Angela was packing up her things to go home, Dr. Henry approached her. He seemed different, lighter, yet with a sincerity she had never seen in him before. "Angela," he began, with a shy smile, "I don't know how to express how much you've changed my perspective, not just about you, but about myself. You taught me something I never thought I'd learn." Angela smiled back, a genuine and welcoming smile. "Sometimes, the most important lessons are the ones we never expect to learn," she said, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "And we all have something to teach if we're willing to listen." With those words, Angela walked out of the hospital doors, the same hospital that once made her feel small and invisible. But now, she knew she had left her mark, not just by saving a life, but by changing hearts and challenging prejudices. As she walked away, her voice seemed to echo like an inner narration, a direct message to the audience following her journey. True strength doesn't lie in how we react to prejudice, but in how we stay true to who we are, no matter how others see us. Each of us has the power to be a positive change, even when no one believes in us. What matters is never giving up on what we know to be true in our hearts. Never let others' prejudice define who you are, Angela concluded in her thoughts, a peaceful expression on her face as she looked towards the horizon. And always remember, a person's worth isn't measured by what others think of them, but by what they do and the difference they can make in the world. If you were touched by this story, share it so that more people can learn to see beyond appearances. Like, comment, and subscribe to keep receiving stories that touch the heart and transform lives. Click on the video appearing on your screen to receive another message that resonates deeply. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, we can all be an Angela, no matter where we are or who people think we are.